It was a bright Saturday afternoon in the peaceful suburban community of Riverton. Streets bustled gently with families enjoying their weekend, children laughing as they raced around the park, neighbors exchanging warm greetings, and couples strolling leisurely to the local farmers market. Amid this tranquility, 16-year-old Michael Reed walked purposefully toward Belmont Jewelers, a high-end establishment renowned throughout the town. Michael, a well-mannered and thoughtful young man, had a special reason for visiting Belmont Jewelers that day. After months of diligent saving, putting aside every dollar he earned from working extra shifts at his neighborhood cafe, he was finally ready to purchase the perfect birthday gift for his younger sister, Emily. The gift, a delicate silver bracelet elegantly displayed in the store's prominent front window, symbolized his unwavering love and the sacrifices he'd willingly made to afford it. Pausing briefly outside the store, Michael adjusted his neatly ironed polo shirt and smoothed down his jacket, mindful of appearances in such an upscale establishment. He pushed open the heavy glass doors, their gentle chime welcoming him inside. His eyes scanned the store, captivated by its luxurious interior, gleaming glass display cases showcasing an array of dazzling jewelry under the soft glow of strategically placed lights. But as Michael approached the main counter, something changed. Margaret Thompson, the store clerk known for her sharp eyes and even sharper tongue, immediately cast a scrutinizing gaze upon him. Her expression quickly shifted from neutral professionalism to thinly veiled suspicion. Michael felt an uneasy tightening in his chest but maintained his composure as he politely pointed to the silver bracelet resting beneath the clear glass counter. "I'd like to see that bracelet, please," he requested calmly, his voice steady despite the uneasy atmosphere now forming around him. Little did Michael know, the seemingly straightforward transaction he had anticipated was about to unfold into a situation far more complicated and dramatic than he could have ever imagined. The sun hung high over the bustling streets of Riverton, casting long golden rays over the city's most luxurious shopping district. The sidewalks were lined with high-end boutiques, their window displays gleaming with dazzling jewelry, designer handbags, and custom-tailored suits that only the wealthiest could afford. Pedestrians strolled leisurely, some chatting on the phone, others peering through the storefronts, admiring goods that cost more than an average person's monthly rent. Among the well-dressed shoppers, Jalen Carter, a 17-year-old black teenager, walked with purpose. He wasn't here to window shop or kill time, he had a goal. For months, he had been saving every extra dollar from his job at Parker's Coffee House, working early shifts before school and late shifts after practice. Every tip, every paycheck had gone into a jar labeled Aaliyah's gift. His little sister's birthday was coming up, and this year, he wanted to give her something special, something memorable. Jalen had his eyes set on one thing, a silver charm bracelet from Belmont Jewelers, the most prestigious jewelry store in town. He had passed by it dozens of times, staring at the delicate bracelet through the glass display. It wasn't just an accessory, it was a symbol of love, a reminder to Aaliyah that no matter what struggles they faced, she deserved something beautiful. As he approached the entrance, Jalen felt a brief wave of hesitation. He knew the kind of people who shopped here, rich, old-money families, corporate executives, and socialites. People who wouldn't think twice about dropping thousands of dollars on a single item. People who probably never had to work as hard as he did for something so small. He wasn't dressed in designer labels, just a simple hoodie over a neatly pressed polo shirt, jeans, and sneakers. But he had his money in his pocket, and he had every right to be there. With a deep breath, he pushed open the glass door, and a soft chime echoed through the pristine interior of the store. The smell of polished wood, expensive cologne, and velvet-lined display cases filled the air. Diamond necklaces, gold watches, and sparkling engagement rings sat under bright lights, exuding wealth and exclusivity. Behind the counter stood Margaret Whitmore, a middle-aged white woman with sharp features and carefully styled blonde hair. The moment Jalen stepped in, her expression changed. Her posture stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes, cold and scrutinizing, fixed on him. Jalen didn't belong here. At least, that's what she had already decided. Michael Reed felt the subtle shift in the air the moment he stepped further into Belmont Jewelers. The soft glow of recessed lighting illuminated rows of elegant display cases filled with shimmering bracelets, delicate necklaces, and polished gemstones. He had walked in with single-minded determination. After months of saving every tip from his job at Parker's Coffee Hut, he was finally here to purchase a birthday gift for his younger sister. Yet, despite the polished floors and pleasant background music, there was an undercurrent of tension he couldn't quite place. Behind the glass counter stood Margaret Whitmore, a middle-aged sales clerk whose demeanor had visibly stiffened the second she laid eyes on him. She offered neither a friendly greeting nor a polite smile, just a narrow-eyed glance that lingered on Michael's hoodie and sneakers. The difference in her posture was subtle, but significant. Shoulders squared, arms folded tightly, chin lifted in a way that conveyed both confidence and condescension. Michael sensed it keenly, a familiar prickle at the back of his neck that warned him to tread carefully. Still, he wasn't about to let someone's judgment spoil his day. He had worked too hard and for too long to afford this silver charm bracelet, something he knew would make his sister's eyes light up with delight. So, adopting the polite tone his mother had always taught him, he approached the main display. "Excuse me," he said, tapping gently on the counter. "I'd like to see the silver bracelet in that case, please." Margaret's eyes flicked from Michael's face to the area where he pointed, then back to him again. She said nothing, merely raised an eyebrow as though questioning his sanity. Seconds ticked by in silence. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached beneath the counter to retrieve the bracelet. "This one?" she asked in a clipped voice. Michael nodded, his heartbeat drumming a little faster than he cared to admit. As she placed the bracelet on a small velvet pad, Margaret's gaze locked on Michael's face again. "You sure you can afford this?" she asked bluntly, her words echoing across the otherwise hushed store. A nearby customer, an older woman wearing pearls, paused mid-conversation to glance in their direction. Michael swallowed, keeping his composure. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, pulling out a modest wad of neatly folded bills from his jacket pocket. "I've got enough right here." That should have ended the matter, but Margaret simply pressed her lips together and stared, eyes flicking over the cash as if expecting it to burst into flames. "Strange," she muttered under her breath, though still loud enough for him to hear. "Kids these days don't usually show up with this kind of money." Michael felt the muscles in his shoulders tense. He took a breath, forcing calm into his voice. "I saved for it," he said. "Working at the coffee shop every morning and some nights, too." Margaret didn't bother to hide her skepticism. "Well," she said icily, "good for you." Her mouth formed a slight smirk as she pushed the bracelet toward him. At that moment, Michael realized the conflict wasn't about the jewelry at all. She had decided he didn't belong here, and that alone threatened to turn a simple purchase into an ugly confrontation. Michael picked up the silver bracelet from the velvet display pad with a mixture of awe and trepidation, heart pounding as he pictured how his sister's face would light up when he finally gifted it to her. This was supposed to be a triumphant moment. After countless hours spent bussing tables and saving every tip, he'd come to Belmont Jewelers intent on making a dream purchase. But the growing tension emanating from Margaret, the store clerk, made it clear that this shopping trip was taking a sudden turn toward disaster. He had noticed Margaret's disapproving stare the instant he crossed the threshold. Her gaze shadowed his every movement, following him like a hawk. Still, Michael was determined to keep his composure. He gently lifted the bracelet, letting the soft overhead lights catch on the gleaming charms. It was even more beautiful up close, delicate loops of silver, each etched with fine details that made it sparkle. But just as his thoughts drifted to how thrilled his sister would be, the bracelet slipped from his fingers. A sharp gasp flew from his lips as it clinked against the glass, then tumbled onto the polished floor. Before he could stoop down to pick it up, Margaret lunged forward, her voice slicing through the store's hushed ambience. "I knew it," she snapped, pointing an accusatory finger at him. Nearby customers froze mid-conversation, their eyes swinging toward them in alarm. "You were trying to steal that, weren't you?" Margaret barked, as though she had been waiting for this exact chance to confirm her suspicions. Stunned, Michael straightened. "No, I just dropped it," he managed, heart hammering. The clerk's lips curled in contempt, and she took a step back, as if his mere proximity were a threat. "Spare me your excuses," Margaret sneered loudly enough for the entire store to hear. "I saw you eyeing that bracelet. Thought you could slip it away the moment I wasn't looking, is that it?" Some customers clutched their purses or jewelry, inching away. Others simply watched, eyes wide, phones hovering at waist level to discreetly record what felt like a slow-motion train wreck. The sudden sensation of everyone's silent judgment pressed in on Michael's chest. He could almost feel the weight of 1,000 assumptions landing squarely on his shoulders. The anger burning inside him was countered by a fearful realization: the last thing he wanted was to appear hostile. He'd heard enough stories, he knew how quickly a scene like this could spiral out of control. Summoning the patience his mother had instilled in him, he forced a measured tone. "Ma'am, I'm not stealing. Look, I have the money to pay." He gestured to the cash he'd placed on the counter. Margaret's nostrils flared as she glanced at the neatly folded bills, then back at Michael. "Don't lie to me, kid," she hissed. "I know you're kind." Michael's grip tightened on the edge of the display. Any semblance of a calm shopping excursion had evaporated. He swallowed hard, feeling the stares of every person in that room prickling against his skin like needles. Then Margaret snatched up the store phone, eyes never leaving him. "I'm calling the police," she declared, voice trembling with triumph. "Let them sort out if you're so innocent." In that moment, Michael realized that no matter how honest or respectful he was, Margaret had already cast him as a criminal. And in her mind, the only outcome was for him to be proven guilty, unless someone, somehow, intervened. Michael barely had time to register the sudden shriek of sirens before the front door to Belmont Jewelers swung open, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, their expressions grim with purpose. The room seemed to freeze in that moment, every hushed conversation extinguished by the presence of authority. One officer, a tall man with a stern face, immediately scanned the store, his hand resting on the holster at his hip, while the other, younger and noticeably uneasy, followed close behind. It was clear they had arrived expecting trouble. Margaret, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and triumphant vindication, pointed directly at Michael. "There he is, officers," she said, pitching her voice loudly enough to ensure no customer missed her words. "That's the kid who tried to steal from me. I caught him red-handed." A ripple of tension spread across the small gathering of onlookers. Some pressed themselves against the glass counters, watching with apprehension, while others discreetly backed away, as though distance might shield them from the unfolding scene. Michael, heart pounding, stood rooted to the spot. He raised his open palms in an attempt to appear non-threatening, struggling to find the right words to explain. "I didn't steal anything," he began, his voice trembling with suppressed frustration and fear. But the taller officer cut him off, his tone brusque and commanding. "Son, I need you to step away from the counter." Slowly. Immediately, Michael felt the weight of 1,000 stereotypes crashing down, every cautionary tale his mother ever told him echoing in his mind. He glanced around, desperate for any spark of compassion in the crowd. Yet all he found were grimaces, sympathetic or otherwise, and too many eyes reflecting uneasy curiosity. Margaret's glare hardened. He tried to pocket an expensive bracelet, she reiterated, fueling the officer's suspicions. If I hadn't caught him in time, he would have been long gone. Michael felt his blood race. I was buying it, he managed, forcing clarity into his voice. But again, he was cut short. This time, the younger officer spoke up, though his gaze wavered. We need to check your pockets. Turn around. Hands on the display case. The directive felt like a gut punch, an immediate condemnation that bypassed any notion of innocence. As he placed his hands down on the smooth glass, Michael's eyes landed on the bracelet, still resting on the floor from when it slipped from his grasp. If only he could pick it up, show them the money he'd saved, prove his intentions. But any sudden move would be too risky, he knew how quickly situations like this could spiral. The clinking of metal made him flinch as the taller officer unclipped a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Margaret wore a twisted half-smile, reveling in the moment. For her, this was confirmation of all the prejudices she'd harbored. She crossed her arms, tilting her chin up as the officer reached for Michael's wrists. Then, just when the weight of inevitability threatened to crush him, the front door burst open once again. A tall woman in a pressed navy blue suit strode inside with purposeful steps, her sharp gaze locking immediately on the tableau in front of her. Unbeknownst to Margaret, or these officers, this newcomer wasn't just any bystander. She was Michael's mother, and she happened to be one of the most influential law enforcement officials in the state. The wave of tension in the room suddenly shifted, teetering on the brink between chaos and revelation, and a shocked hush settled over everyone inside. The door to Belmont Jewelers swung open again, interrupting the tense silence that had settled over the store. In walked a tall woman, her stride purposeful and confident. She wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, and her very presence demanded attention. The officers, mid-confrontation with Michael, exchanged uncertain glances. Margaret's mocking smirk faltered for the first time since this ordeal began. Without hesitating, the woman stepped toward Michael, her gaze hardening as she noticed one of the officers gripping his arm. That's enough, she said, her voice low but undeniably authoritative. The older officer bristled instinctively, his grip on Michael's wrist not loosening. Ma'am, he began, I'm afraid we're in the middle of. She lifted her hand, silencing him with a quiet finality that sent a ripple through the onlookers. There was something about her demeanor that made defiance seem like a poor choice. I'm Simone Reed, she announced, glancing from the officer's badge to Margaret's shocked face. And that young man you're holding happens to be my son. Her steady eyes shifted to the second officer, who had taken a half-step back, no doubt recognizing the name. As I recall, the FBI chief's authority extends well beyond these city limits. Margaret's stunned expression quickly morphed into disbelief. Her gaze darted between Michael, frozen in disbelief himself, and Simone. Your son, she repeated hollowly. The significance of Simone's position slammed into her, sweeping away any veneer of confidence. In a single sentence, the power balance shifted. Officer Daniels, the older of the two, released Michael's arm almost reflexively. The tension that had been coiled throughout the store seemed to exhale, replaced by a sense that the stakes were far higher than anyone had realized. Customers who had kept a safe distance pressed in a little closer, curiosity and relief mingling in their whispers. Simone squared her shoulders, her calm voice cutting through the thick air. I'd like to know exactly what led to my son being treated like a criminal. She eyed the bracelet on the floor, then flicked her gaze at Margaret. "And I expect to see any store security footage that explains these accusations." Margaret attempted to speak, but words failed her. A flush crept along her cheeks, evidence of shame mixed with panic. She glanced at the officers, hoping for backup, but found neither. The entire crowd could sense the shift. An ordinary teenager had just become the focal point of a powerful reckoning, and the woman who had entered wasn't about to let him face it alone. The hush inside Belmont Jewelers deepened as Simone Reed, FBI chief and mother to the accused teenager, fixed her unwavering gaze on the store's security monitor. A handful of onlookers edged closer, both curious and apprehensive, as a jittery store manager queued up the footage. In it, the entire sequence played out in stark detail. Michael entered, politely asked to see the silver bracelet, and carefully examined it. Then came the accident, the bracelet slipping from his fingers onto the floor, followed immediately by Margaret's dramatic accusations and the startled reactions of those nearby. A collective intake of breath rippled through the gathering when the replay revealed how little time had passed between the bracelet falling and Margaret calling the police. There was no sign of Michael hiding anything, no stealthy movements, no attempted theft. Instead, the camera caught him pausing, clearly startled, as Margaret lunged for the phone with a look of vindication. Her claims that Michael was snooping or acting suspiciously suddenly held no weight against the unbiased reality captured on screen. Officer Daniels stood by with his arms folded, beads of sweat gathering at his temple. His younger partner, Officer Reese, exhaled in muted relief, evidence, at last, that they had overreacted on unverified claims. Simone glanced calmly toward both officers, a chill clarity in her voice. "You see now," she said softly, "my son never tried to steal a thing." Daniels shifted uncomfortably, jaw clenched, while Reese looked contrite enough to apologize on the spot. Margaret, her face pale and drawn, stared at the floor. All her earlier bravado evaporated, there was no fighting the truth. The rattle of her breath seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. She opened her mouth as though to explain or defend herself, but no words came. Simone turned to Michael, who had stood tensely this whole time, hands clenched at his sides. "You okay, kiddo?" she asked, voice softening for the first time. His shoulders sagged in a mixture of relief and lingering anger. "I am now," he mumbled, meeting his mother's gaze with gratitude. The tension dissipated like fog under sunlight. A handful of bystanders began whispering, quietly marveling at how swiftly an ordinary shopping trip had spiraled into a grave injustice, and how close Michael had come to a far darker outcome without the security footage to save him. As the final frames froze on the screen, Simone turned back to Margaret and the officers, her tone resolute. "So," she said firmly, "let's talk about the consequences of accusing someone without a single shred of proof." A day after the dramatic incident at Belmont Jewelers, social media platforms erupted with posts, pictures, and videos capturing every angle of Michael Reed's wrongful accusation and his mother's resolute intervention. Within hours, hashtags like #JusticeForMichael and #BelmontIncident began trending across various sites, while countless people shared their own experiences of unfair treatment in seemingly harmless places. Clips from the store's security footage, showing exactly how the bracelet fell and how quickly Margaret called the police, became the focal point of a larger conversation on racial profiling. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon national media followed suit. Evening broadcasts replayed segments of the security video, cutting to interviews with stunned customers who had witnessed the confrontation firsthand. In living rooms across the country, families gathered around TV screens and shook their heads at how a simple visit to buy a birthday present spiraled into a near-life-altering ordeal for a teenage boy. Some interviews highlighted neighbors' reactions in Riverton. Most were horrified that such an incident could take place in their calm, friendly town, while others admitted they weren't entirely surprised, pointing out that prejudice often lurked just beneath the surface, even in welcoming communities. Belmont Jewelers faced intense backlash almost immediately. Angry customers flooded their voicemail and social media pages demanding accountability, questioning store policies, and threatening to boycott. A wave of one-star reviews appeared on consumer websites, criticizing the establishment for employing staff who jumped to prejudiced conclusions. The store manager, pressed by reporters' cameras lining the sidewalk outside, issued a carefully worded apology. Still, many found the statement hollow and insufficient. They wanted to see real change, not just words to quell public outrage. Meanwhile, Michael and his mother, Simone, received an outpouring of support. Cards, letters, and messages poured in from neighbors, classmates, and even strangers across the country, applauding Michael's composure and thanking Simone for using her position to uphold justice. Community leaders organized a small rally near the town center, where people spoke openly about the need for improved bias training and stronger accountability measures, both in retail environments and in law enforcement. In that sense, the ordeal became more than just Michael's story. It shone a spotlight on systemic issues that touched many lives, stirring a renewed call for mutual respect, empathy, and meaningful change throughout Riverton and beyond. The days following the incident at Belmont Jewelers saw a ripple of unexpected progress sweep through Riverton. Where there had once been discomfort and tension, there was now a renewed sense of awareness and determination. Local businesses, spurred by the intense spotlight on the case, began re-evaluating their customer service training programs, emphasizing empathy and inclusivity over the rigid, checklist approach that had allowed such biases to fester. Store managers organized workshops in partnership with the Riverton Chamber of Commerce, inviting civil rights advocates and community leaders to speak to employees about recognizing subconscious prejudice, handling conflict respectfully, and building trust with diverse clientele. Schools, too, took notice. Teachers at Riverton High incorporated Michael's story into classroom discussions on current events and social studies, asking students to debate the responsibility of bystanders when they witness injustice. Younger students, some around Michael's sister's age, worked on art projects depicting themes of equality and kindness. Even the local youth basketball league, where Michael occasionally helped out, instituted a code of conduct explicitly denouncing discrimination. Parents who once casually assumed that things like this don't happen here found themselves confronting a truth that had long gone unspoken. Michael himself became something of a local figure. Though he never sought fame, neighbors recognized him around town and greeted him with supportive nods or encouraging words. Kids who had never met him were inspired by his composure under pressure, and many approached him privately to share their own stories of feeling judged or overlooked. Meanwhile, Simone's unwavering stance against wrongful profiling left a deep impression on both local police officers and the broader public. Her decisive handling of the situation affirmed that accountability should be more than a buzzword, it ought to be a lived principle. Belmont Jewelers, once known for its exclusive atmosphere, slowly transformed its image. After Margaret's departure, they hired staff who were committed to offering genuine courtesy to every customer, regardless of background. The owner, eager to restore the shop's reputation, hosted an open forum where residents could voice concerns and suggestions for improvement. In the end, what had started as an ugly confrontation bloomed into a communal introspection, a reminder that even a quiet suburb like Riverton could be a catalyst for change. For all its painful lessons, the outcome showed how an act of prejudice could, with honest reflection and determined action, foster empathy, unity, and a shared commitment to uphold dignity for all. Michael's life returned to its steady rhythm in the weeks that followed, but nothing would ever be quite the same. He still worked hard at Parker's Coffee House, carefully saving for his sister's future, yet now, he carried with him a heightened awareness of the subtle biases that flicker around corners and in the minds of strangers. People stopped him in the street, offering kind words and thanking him for sharing his story. His quiet courage had resonated far beyond Riverton, inspiring countless others who'd once felt powerless in the face of prejudice. His mother, Simone, returned to her duties as FBI chief, but made sure her team recognized the importance of accountability, reminding them that justice begins with understanding, and that protecting citizens means standing up for those falsely accused as much as catching real criminals. Around town, conversations opened up about dismantling prejudices, about leaning into empathy rather than fear, and about how one person's small decision to speak up could spark big change. Most of all, Michael realized that neither anger nor despair needed to define him. Instead, he discovered a renewed belief in what was possible when the truth came to light and when people chose to do the right thing. The silver bracelet he finally bought for his sister might have been the initial goal, but the real gift was something more enduring: hope that even in the toughest moments, fairness and dignity could still triumph. In life, true understanding often emerges from the most unexpected challenges. Michael's experience in the jewelry store shows us that simple assumptions, left unchecked, can grow into serious injustices affecting real people with hopes and dreams of their own. For older adults, this lesson resonates deeply. We've lived long enough to know that respect and empathy transcend wealth, status, or background. When we welcome others with an open mind instead of quick judgments, we build bridges of trust that benefit everyone. Likewise, standing up for someone unfairly accused reminds us that our voices matter. Each time we speak against unkind words or biased behavior, we reinforce a standard of decency that influences our families and communities. The quiet courage shown in Michael's story challenges us to reflect on how we respond in similar situations, whether we speak out or look away. Ultimately, it's never too late to champion fairness and compassion. By choosing to see the humanity in others and acting upon it, we help create a legacy of kindness that endures well beyond our own lifetimes. Are you moved by Michael's story? Let it inspire you to take a stand. Maybe you felt powerless or watched someone face unfair judgment. Today, you can change that. Share this video, discuss it with friends, and encourage respectful conversations about bias. By doing so, you shine a light on issues that often stay hidden. Speak up when you see injustice. Your voice might be the difference between silence and real change. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay connected. Together, let's show the world that a single act of courage can spark lasting transformation.